Hey there, and welcome back. All right, we are continuing our month on being a well-rounded handler. We've chosen about 4 things. I think I could talk about easily about 12 things, but we've chosen 4 things to really think about for this month. And the next thing we're going with is managing expectations. Okay. There's this quote that in my preparation for this I came across, which is, "Expectation is the root of all heartache," said Shakespeare. Okay. And maybe a whole bunch of dog handlers said that as well. So expectations are, yes, overt, and sometimes when you're like, well, I expected this to happen. I've put in all this work. I expect this outcome. Okay, great. But they also can be really sneaky. Okay. Expectations can show up as hope. It can show up as pressure. It can show up as comparison. And the expectations kind of get in there, right? Because, I've been having this conversation a lot with several clients, coaching clients lately. And it is this idea that we might be walking into the ring thinking about process goals, but we are managing or we are evaluating how we did on our run by the outcome. Okay. And that to me is an example of a sneaky expectation. And then people will push back on me, right? Yeah, but I mean, I should be able to, I should, like my dog and I, and da 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 da, and all of these reasons that they should not have made a mistake in the ring. And the thing is we forget all the time. This is a sport, people. We make mistakes all the time. Our dogs make mistakes all the times. I am not a robot. My dogs are not robots. Like, if you're running a robot, then great for you. But I am not running robots, right? So the idea that we have these expectations, we might again say that we don't, right? Because we're being really true to our process goals. But deep down, we think, look, I've put in the time. My dog's 6. We're in that phase where we're really jiving as a team. Like, I expect my dog to cue when we walk into the ring. And then they don't. And then the world falls apart. And you say, but my process goals were running connected. And you're like, yes, but how did you evaluate your run? Were you connected? Well, we didn't cue. Then you're not going back to process goals, right? As your measuring stick, if you will. Okay. So I just bring all of that up to remind us that expectations are sneaky, okay? And they show up dressed as a bunch of other things like comparison or pressure or just thinking like, look, I put in all of this work, therefore I should be getting back all of these results, okay? So we want to make sure that we are, if we're thinking like kind of taking off on last week, right? If we're showing up as leaders, then we have to think about what we're leading with, and that includes our expectations, okay? We want the things, we have the goals, you're here because you have big goals and big dreams that you are chasing, and I wouldn't change that for the world, okay? But we want to make sure that any expectations that we do have are kind of out on the table. Okay. Like, I'm not going to say you can't have expectations. You're just naturally going to have expectations. Okay. That's just kind of the name of the game. But I want them to be like clear, articulated. I want them, like I said, out on the table, because otherwise you're hiding, and then they'll be sneaky, and then you'll be surprised when you're disappointed if something goes wrong. And then this whole like snowball effect. Okay. So they become landmines, basically, if we don't uncover them, right? Makes sense, right? So we want expectations that are clear and realistic, and particularly tied to things that we can control, like process goals, right? So we want to be able to balance our ambition with like appropriate expectations. Reasonable expectations. And appropriate might mean appropriate for that dog with how much training they have or how old they are or their experience level or, whatever that is. Okay. That would be an idea of an appropriate expectation. So even with I'm going to say made dogs, it's sort of a horse term, but like even with my experienced dogs, we're an experienced team. I have an expectation that they are capable of doing what's in front of them, right? And that it is likely that if we execute, that it is likely that we execute well as a team. And then if we do execute well as a team, it is likely that we would cue. But like there's a judge involved, there's, I don't know, extenuating circumstances involved, someone could turn on the fan, someone could knock down the ring gating. I mean, there's like all kinds of crazy stuff that could happen. I'm only responsible for my expectation that I think that we can handle our process goals and pretty much do what we need to do together as a team. Okay. So we want to have that amount of awareness and clarity about what it is that we're walking into the ring with. Okay. So in that way, we're sort of balancing the ambition that we have, that I want us all to have. I mean, like, why else like enter a trial, right? So I want us to have some ambition, but I also want us to have the awareness, the appropriate awareness, right? Like for instance, like I can't expect my green baby dog to read my mind, right? I can't expect to be like our dogs to be perfect just because they quote should know better. Just like they can't expect us to be perfect because we should know better, right? If only our dogs like commentated on us the way we commentated on them. Can you imagine? They'd be like, Shirley, you know that coming out of that tunnel, you got to look me in the eyes, like what would they say? Anyway, it's just a funny aside. Okay. But we can't expect every weekend to be perfect and magical just because we went to class 3 times, paid the entry fees, and drove to the trial, right? So we want to stay grounded in what's true today. And the today thing is really important because, I don't know about you, but I am not exactly the same person every day or every trial, right? There are some different nuances. Maybe I got more sleep. Maybe I ate my protein. Maybe I didn't eat my protein. Maybe I'm totally dehydrated, like whatever it is. So we want to make sure that we are competing and showing up and training from the true place, not like the fantasy version or the future version of who we think we should be. Okay. No shoulding in this moment. Okay. All right. So let's talk about some unspoken expectations. Okay. So here's some things. So you expect your dog to handle pressure even if you haven't specifically trained for pressure, or you expect yourself to hold it together even though you've been stressed out all week because of work or life or kids or your car or whatever, or you're expecting a certain outcome because you've worked so hard. Okay. I think those are really common things, right? I know that, for instance, for me, I'm really going through this phase with my baby dog or one of my baby dogs where I'm trying to train her now for pressure and for different environments because she really hasn't seen that many environments. And yeah, she has a lot of great skills, but I noticed at my national, for instance, that, her great skills weren't transferring to those new environments or the different pressures or all of that because she's a baby dog. So that would have been an unreasonable expectation to have. Now, I've talked about this on a podcast recently, but I think what was interesting is for me, specifically walking into the obedience ring, I was very hopeful for her. But right at the beginning, she showed me that she was stressed. And I, in that moment, instantly was able to shift my expectations of what the run was going to be and show up differently for her because I'm like, okay, I don't have the dog that I have while I was training. She's feeling all the feels. I got to shift. Okay. So great for me for being aware of that in that moment. But I think that that's a really common thing is to think that like, oh, my dog's trained. They have the skills and maybe don't have the skills for the different environments or different kinds of pressure. Okay. So we want to make sure that we don't kind of run amok with these kind of unchecked or, unaware expectations, which is kind of ridiculous because how can we make sure that we're checking our expectations if we don't know that they're there? I get that. Okay. I can't even say it. It's so confusing. But we want to make sure that we're sort of developing that awareness and checking in on our expectations. Just like last week, we were checking in on our energy. Okay. We have to remember that our dogs don't know this this concept of like what's at stake. They like to do well. They like to cheer. They like the rewards. Some dogs really like to win. I have absolutely seen that. But they really want, that feedback from us. So they're really relying on how we feel as a result of their run. Okay. They're relying on that a lot. All right. So instead, we want to expect that we always are learning, right? That we're learning something valuable for everyone. We can expect that we can stick to our process goals, right? That's a reasonable expectation. We can expect to be calm and clear and steady, as we talked about last week. We can expect that we have a dog that feels confident and supported because we're going to support them in that way. Okay. So if you walk into the ring with those kinds of expectations, that's already a much different experience, right? It's a much different experience. Your expectations now are probably more rooted in process goals instead of rooted in outcome. And therefore you're in a way, you're like reeling them in is kind of the feeling I'm getting, where you're reeling in your expectations to be things that are within your control. And when you realize that, you start to shift it, you start to look a little bit more in. And again, you stop focusing on your results driving home. You stop focusing on what you get, what the payoff is from running your dog. Is the payoff a cue, right? So that's a different experience. So we want to have those process expectations in a sense, okay? We want to know what we're working toward in like the long game, not just rely on this cue for validation of our training, right? Or validation of who we are as handlers, or even validation of how amazing our dogs are, okay? So kind of like we did with that quick 30-second thing last week, I want you to, do a little bit of an expectation audit before you run or before you train. Ask yourself, what am I expecting from myself today? What am I expecting from my dog today? And I swear, as soon as you even ask the question, it makes you like more honest and be like, okay, I'm not just expecting a cue. Like I'm expecting my dog to like show up pretty confident. I'm expecting for me to be like confident and calm and steady or whatever, right? And then if you do get crazy things, like if you do say, well, I'm expecting to finish that title today, then the next question should be, are those expectations based on reality or some sort of time pressure? Are they realistic? And then finally, what is a more grounded expectation then that sets up us for success? Because it's very possible that yes, you will finish that title this weekend, but in order to do that, a lot of things have to go right first. So why not focus on running connected or picking your dog up at the corners or, or making eye contact or what have you, whatever it is that you're working on? Why not work on that? And because if you put all those pieces together, then you are likely to cue, which means you are likely to finish that title. Okay? So we want to make sure that we are matching our expectations to where we actually are, what we can control, and not just where we wish we were or things that we cannot control. And remember, we don't control cues. We don't control outcomes. Okay? So the more we clearly manage our expectations up front, the less we're going to be disappointed on the back. And it's not that we're not going to fail still or not going to make mistakes or not going to NQ. This isn't some magic panacea. Okay. But what it's going to do is it's going to make us a little more connected. I hate to say it, to reality, which is really true, and set like just have some more appropriate expectations of what could happen over the weekend or the day or the run. Okay. And that makes it more honest. That makes us more connected to our dogs. It kind of takes into effect that we're both fallible beings trying to do the sport as a team. And I just think if something does go wrong, God forbid, because you're doing all the other right things, visualizing all those other good things. Okay. But if something does wrong, if a mistake is made, then it's not the end of the world. Okay. Whereas if you are only going by having these sneaky expectations all tied to outcomes and the outcome isn't there, then you can't celebrate your progress because you didn't even put your progress or your process goals on the table. Okay. So I want you to really think about today and this week, really in between lessons, I guess. What are those sneaky expectations you have? Or if that's hard for you to kind of figure out because they're sneaky, then think about expectations you had in the past that you were disappointed by. Like you had an expectation that you would cue or you would get a better score or, you would finish a title or something like that and it didn't happen. Try to dissect that, a past thing, a past instance, and see if you can't garner some insight from that. Okay? Because we want to become the kind of team that is always showing up for our dogs in an appropriate, authentic, meaningful way. And part of that is not treating them like robots, right? Being really realistic about our expectations and meeting them and ourselves even where we are. Okay? All right. Lots to digest with this week. So let me know how it goes.